So I'll tell you like this. Normally, the Thursday night shiurim, it's usually on the parsha, and it's usually more, I would say it's more emotional than intellectual. They're more just, simpler concepts that you sort of just try to hit home. This week is going to be a little different. I was looking, I couldn't feel connected to a lot of the things in the sixth parsha, and I came across an article. This is an article by the author of the Bilvavi, and it's entitled Eved. I'm not going to say I fully grasp where he's going. I could tell you I could think about what I think he means. We'll learn it together. And listen, if we don't like the way this goes, then we just don't upload this year. But it's very interesting, and it's very different. We'll read it together. These are his notes. And it's like just his writing and his ideas. We'll see. Now, the beginning of the sixth parasha talks about Avodim, an Eved Ivri, and how an Eved Ivri goes free after 7 years, and if he chooses to stay, v'chule. So this is where the Bilvavi writes the concept of an Eved. We'll read it together. I'll do my best to explain of what I think he means. He says like this. The Bilvavi writes, Yesh Madregas Ben. There's a relationship that we have with Hashem called a son. Bonim atam l'Hashem lekeichem. V'yesh Madregas Eved. And there's also a relationship called a slave. Avodaihem, they're my slaves. There's two different ways, right? We say it on Rosh Hashanah davening, right? Im kivonim, im ka'avadim. There are different ways. And we've talked about the differences many, many times. It says the Bilvavi, B'madregas ben, regarding the relationship of a son, yesh dalid madregas. There's 4 different types. There's 4 classic prototypes of a son. Keneged dalid banim divrei Torah, as we all know in the Seder, there's the 4 sons. There's a chacham, there's a rasha, there's a tam, and there's a Eini Yedei Lishol. So these are the 4 different types of sons, but they're all still children. You have good sons, you have bad sons, simple sons, confused sons, whatever they are, but they're all your sons. But says the Bilvavi, Ulamata mikach, and we know that below all these sons, Yesh Eved. The Madrega of Eved is not to the same extent as a Ben. There's all the Banim, all the sons, and then there's under it is Eved. Even Eved is Av Dalid. It's thicker than 4. It's heavier than the 4. You have the 4 sons, and then the thicker one below it, the Av, below it is an Eved. Koloimar, Zu Avius, Limata Mimadregas Dalid Banim. An Eved is someone who's lower than the 4 sons. Okay, I think so far so good. Umadregas ben ha'acharoin mimutzas, be'madregas ben l'madregas Eved. This is very interesting. It's supposed to be that the last son, that one of the sons, is supposed to be the bridge. And I'll explain what this means. At least I think what this means. That there's the Ben relationship you have with Hashem, and then there's the Eved relationship you have with Hashem. And like all healthy relationships, there has to be a bridge connecting the Ben and the Eved. Now, what happens when that relationship, when that bridge splinters? He says, but there's supposed to be 4 sons, and the last son doesn't mean last. It means one of the sons is supposed to be a bridge between an Eved and a Ben. And this will become clear over the next few minutes. Ulakach, and therefore, because it's supposed to be that there's 4 sons, and the 4th son is supposed to also be an Eved, Matzinu Eitzel Noach. We find by Noach, Shahaya Loi Gimel Banim. Right, Noach had 3 sons. Right, Shem, Cham, and Yafes. Right, he had his Chacham, he had his Rasha. What is Yafes? I guess he's a Tam. I don't know. But he had his 3. He didn't have his 4. But again, in a perfected world, and this is the key, in a perfect world, the relationship that we have with Hashem of a Ben and the relationship we have with Hashem of an Eved are not splintered. And I'll explain what this means. It's not 2 different people, and it's not 2 different aspects, but rather it's a cohesiveness of living like both. Noach wanted that. He wanted there to be one person who's both a Ben and an Eved. But what happened? Amr Chazal, he had 3 sons. Okay? Says the Medrash. Amr of Barachia. Rabbi Achia says, Har Beit Tsar Nitzar Noach B'Teva, Shloihaya Ben Katan Shim Sheshenu. The Medrash says that Noach was very upset that he did not have a younger son. Now, on a simple level of the Medrash, he wanted a son to take care of him. He wanted a young son to take care of him. But says the Bilvavi, what was bothering Noach was that there was no bridge between his sons and an Eved. Again, this will all hopefully become clear at the end. Omar, so the Medrash says that Noach said, "L'keshe'etzei ani mamili ben katan shim shesheni." I'll have a fourth son. When I come out of this teva, he kept on saying throughout the teva, when I come out, I'm going to have that fourth son. I'm going to have the 4 sons. That's what I'm going to have. But kivan she'asal Cham oisei ma'isa. But we all know that after he got out of the teva, Cham hurt him in such a way that stopped him from being able to have children. So what did he do? Lefikach ya'oisei ish evid la'achiv shein avodim li. Noach cursed Cham's first son, and Canaan, Eved Avodim Yelachav. It's interesting. So says the Bilvavi, Lefikach Ya'oisei Ish Eved La'achav, fine. Ozi Hopach Canaan L'Revi Eved L'Loiben. Then all of a sudden, that fourth son that was supposed to bridge the world of Ben, of children, to the world of Eved, all of a sudden, it splintered. You see, the first time, we've had this many times from Rav Tzaddik, that the first time something's mentioned in the Torah is its essence. The first time in Eved is mentioned in the Torah is this. And what was supposed to be was 4 sons, with the last one being a bridge, being both a Ben and an Eved at the same time in a healthy way. But because it was brought about in an unhealthy way, it was splintered. And then all of a sudden, Canaan is no longer the 4th son, so to speak. He's an Eved. And that Ben and Eved split. Let's keep going, and hopefully this will become clear. Ushleimis haben hakatan. And says the Bilvavi, this is just his notes to himself. Ushleimis haben hakatan. And the completion of that last son, which is Canaan, Gam Madrigas Ben v'Gam Madrigas Eved. It was supposed to be that he was both a Ben and an Eved at the same time in a healthy way, but it never ended up happening. What happened? Ulam Eitzel Canaan, Ein loy Teiras ben shel Noach, elo Teiras ben shel Cham, uklapi Noach ein el Eved. All of a sudden, it was splintered. Canaan is no longer at the same time a Ben and an Eved. He's a Ben to his father and an Eved to Noach, but not both. He's not to one person a Ben and an Eved. He's not a son and a slave. To Noach, he's a slave. Noach doesn't look at him as family anymore. You're a slave. His father, you're just a Ben. And what happened was there was a splintering. There was a separation in that relationship. That relationship of Ben and Eved split. Where it wasn't one person in a healthy way, cohesively, going back and forth, Ben to Eved. But rather happened, it's split. Canaan to one person is a Ben, and to one person is an Eved, but not in a healthy way. There was a split in the personality. Ben went one way, Eved went another way. And he says, V'nimsa shenifredu madregas Ben umadregas Eved. That all of a sudden, you did not have one person at the same time being a Ben and an Eved to everybody, but rather, you're a Ben sometimes and an Eved sometimes. And there was a split personality. And he says like this, Umadregas Eved kolech la'atzmai u'b'loshen acheres. What do I mean in other words, says the Bilvavi, and I'll explain in a moment what I think he means. Shekoyach ha'avdus goiver al koyach haben. That all of a sudden, instead of being both, what happened was the slave mentality overtook him. The Ram was ba'aviyos Eved. That Av, it was thicker than 4. Instead of being lower, it became thicker and it became stronger than the other 4. Av Rosh Tevis Eved Ben. Sha'aviyos Eved goiver al Torah Shem Ben. You know what this means? What does this look like? I was thinking about this today. What does it look like when Ben and an Eved are split? You know what I think it looks like? First of all, it looks like a very inconsistent person. You see, Ben symbolizes serving Hashem in a very exalted way. But Ben and an Eved, you need to be both. Let me explain. Each one on its own could be perverted. Each one on its own can be ruined. You see, if your relationship with Hashem is purely that of a ben, just a ben, then you know what you won't be? You won't be consistent. One of the great milas of a Jew is that he's an eved. An eved ne'eman. You see, when someone just looks at Hashem as just a father, just Avinu, purely Avinu, no Malkeinu, just Avinu, then I see it with my father, my own father. You get away with certain things. You talk to him in ways that other people don't. When you do it, it's amazing. And you're on fire. And you have those moments of a ben. But are you going to show up to shul 3 times a day? Not necessarily. Sometimes you'll tell your dad, I'm not feeling it. That's when you have just a ben. What happens when you're just an eved? You see, when you're just an eved, we all know what happens. You become depressed. When you're just stuck, when you feel like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you feel like anything in life, if you feel like you're a slave to it, it's not going to make you a happy person, it's not going to make you a healthy person. If you look at Yiddishkeit as just Malkeinu, if you look at Hashem as just your king, without any aspect of Avinu, if he's just your king, we see what that's like. I've met many people like that. They go to shul 3 times a day, they keep Torah mitzvahs, but they're miserable, empty people. Because they look at Yiddishkeit as this burden that if you don't keep, you'll burn in Gehenna. That's if you're just an eved. So what's the problem? What's the opposite way to do it? Right? The opposite way is infuse Avinu. But what if you ever tell any yeshiva, like a Rosh Yeshiva or a Rosh Koilo, who thinks that this type of shul is, and Rabbi Weinberger and my brother, and they feel that it's corrupting. What are they afraid of? What they're afraid of, if you'd ask them what they're afraid of, I don't know what they're actually afraid of, but like if you ask them, I don't know, they're afraid of it. It's like the famous line from Rabbi Nachman. That Rabbi Nachman said that when the disagreement between the Shpal Zayd and Rabbi Nachman said, the Rabbi Nachman he's heard of, I also wouldn't like. Meaning, what it really comes down to is just a misunderstanding and a misunderstanding of what they're afraid of. But you'd ask someone from that world, what are you afraid of from the Neo Hasidim or the Rabbi Weinberger type people? What are you afraid of? What they're afraid of is just Avinu. That you get just people that just want to dance and don't want to actually be stuck to keep the actual rigid laws. And they won't be consistent in shul. They'll go to shul once a week and they'll sing and dance, Avinu, but they won't have that consistently, that just go to shul, do your job. So this split between Avinu Malkeinu, between Eved and a Ben, that took place with Canaan, that when Canaan was supposed to be at the same time with everyone, both a Ben and an Eved, but it was split. He's a Ben to some and an Eved to others. And it became like the split personality. It allowed for this reality of, I could be a Ben sometimes, I could have someone who's just Ben, and I could have someone who's just an Eved. And it creates, within Klal Yisrael, it created this opportunity that you could have 2 different worlds. That you could have Jews that are just Banim Lamakom. But that's also not healthy. Because at some point you got to go to shul. And that's part of the problem. We've talked about this in the past. The part of the problem of the younger people, I sound old enough to say this, part of the problem with the younger people and the whole kumsitz mentality is that's great. But there's bread and butter. You gotta put tefillin on every day. You see, bonim is great, but only when it's infused with avodim. And avodim are great, only when it's infused with bonim. But what happened was there was a split. That Canaan was, to some people, just a Ben, and not an Eved. And to other people, just an Eved. And it sort of evolved. It created this little crack that eventually evolved into 2 different worlds. So it says, I think this is what he means. But he says, Umadregas b'nei Yisrael. But what is Klal Yisrael? Olam Atikun. Klal Yisrael is perfect. And therefore the objective of Klal Yisrael is to perfect all flaws in the universe. And the objective of Klal Yisrael is to merge these worlds together again. And what do I mean? Lachzor uletzaref shem toyar ben im shem toyar eved. That all of a sudden, there should no longer be a ben and an eved, that you have Yidden who are just Banim and Yidden who are just Avadim, because that's not healthy. Klal Yisrael's objective is to mend this gap, that you could be at the same time Avinu Malkeinu in a healthy way. And he says, V'zeu mahalach Golus Mitzrayim. And this really was the whole inyan of Golus Mitzrayim, is that you're an Eved, a slave to Paro, but at the same time filled with that regalness of Banim. That you could be a Ben Melech and an Eved at the same time. And Klal Yisrael going through that suffering of Mitzrayim, but doing it in the way of Banim, doing it in the way that only a Ben can, that was the beginning of this mending of this relationship. And he says, Gulas Yisrael Mitzrayim, that we go into it as Avadim, and we're there as Avadim, but Hashem takes us out. Why? Because B'ni B'chari Yisrael. So there's this process of going into the world of Avadim and coming out as Banim. And you somehow, the same people were Avadim and Banim at the same time. And says the Bilvavi, in an amazingly brilliant way, how did we go into Mitzrayim? Yosef was sold as an Eved by his family members. So it's an Eved by his blood. That he's the Banim of Yaakov sell him as an Eved. And it's these two worlds trying to sort of begin to glue together, of Yosef HaTzadik being the Ben of Yaakov Avinu, but also an Eved. And it's beginning to sort of push together. And he says on the left side, and the truth is it was even supposed to be before this, before Klal Yisrael went into Golus, and we're Avodim, but Hashem took us out as Banim, so that you're both Avodim and Banim at the same time. It was really supposed to be before this. Yaakov Avinu, who does he marry? He has Rachel and Leah, and he has Bilhah and Zilpah. Bilhah and Zilpah were the Shivchas. And it was supposed to be that Yaakov Avinu married Bilhah and Zilpah, Shvachais, and Rachel Leah, Banim, blood, and Avadim, and having Shvatim together in a healthy, cohesive way. I saw this from the Maharal. Echad, right? Shema Yisrael Shem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which was said to Yaakov Avinu the first time. Echad is Aleph, Yaakov, Ches and Daled. The 8 from Rachel Leah, and the 4 from Bilhah Zilpah. And it was supposed to be Echad, unifying all these worlds. But he says, Yaakov Shenasa Beis Nashim Leah Rachel, that Yaakov married these two sisters, blood, of Rachel and Leah, Ubei Shvachais, and 2 maids, 2 slaves of Bilhah and Zilpah. And it was supposed to be Ayedekin Mitzaref Banim and Avadim. It was supposed to be healthy and it was supposed to be perfect. And all of a sudden you had Yaakov Avinu's family full of Banim and Avadim, and it was supposed to be cohesive. But it didn't work out that way. What happened? The children of Rachel and Leah were Banim, more predominantly. We all learn in Rashi, we don't really think about it as adults. That the Shvatim, the outside of Yosef, but the children of Leah didn't get along with the children of Bilhah and Zilpah. They kept on calling them Bnei Shvachis, Bnei Shvachis. You know what it was? It was that they were more Banim, Lamakim, and the other ones were more Avadim, and it wasn't cohesive yet. He says amazing. It was not complete yet. The children of Bilhah and Zilpah were more Avadim than Banim, and it wasn't healthy yet. And he says the Bilvavi, that's what Yosef told the Lashon Hara that he said. Right? He says, Diba Samra El Avihem. Right? That Yosef tells Yaakov Avinu all about the negativity of the Shvatim. You know what he was saying? He was telling them it's not done yet. That there's a split. Right? Yosef was bothered that they weren't treating the Bnei Shvachis well, because Yosef saw a split. And he was telling his father, I know you thought that they're all Banim and Avadim in a healthy way. They're not. There's a split in the family. That you have Banim and you have Avadim. And like I said, nowadays what you see, the way that's developed, is you have Yidden who are Avadim Dika Yidden and Yidden that are Banim Dika Yidden. And they usually don't appreciate each other. The Bonim look at the old men in the young Israel in the back of the shul and be like, what are there's no fire in the davening. They haven't missed a daf yomi in 35 years. Yeah, but there's no fire. There's no kumzitz. It's like, yeah, dude, 35, that can't be nothing. And then you got the young Israel guys, and they'll call us and other shuls happy clappy. I can't imagine that's a compliment. So what's the answer? The answer is they're like, what are they doing? They're just dancing around the fire like the old pagans. So what's the answer? It's bonim and avodim, and it's split. And that began to be rectified by Yaakov marrying, it didn't work. And then they sold Yosef as an Eved, by his blood. It still didn't work. Then all of a sudden, Klal Yisrael goes into Mitzrayim as avodim, but acts in a regal way. You see it in this country, that people, if you're stuck as an Eved, you could be still stuck that way. 100 years later, you could still think of yourself as an Eved, but all of a sudden, Klal Yisrael as avodim, but regal, bonim lamakim, and Hashem takes us out of Egypt, no longer avodim, because B'nai B'char Yisrael. And says the last paragraph in the Bilvavi, V'zeu shoirish golus Mitzrayim v'agula. That was the process of golus to gula, I never thought about it. They say it's like melting in a kivshana esh. It was like taking two kalim and melting it together of bonim and avodim. L'chaber toyer shem ben in toyer shem eved. L'kach ikar ha'geula hu'idei Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, who's the goyal? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is the greatest ben lamakim, but how is he described? Eved Neman. Moshe Rabbeinu is those two worlds in a perfect, healthy way. Full of passion, but full of consistency. Passion and consistency at the same time coming together. That's the inyan of a real Eved. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. So I'll tell you like this, just to end with it. If you look in the bottom, the next paragraph is from the Shem Yishmuel. The Shem Yishmuel, I'll just say it outside. The Shem Yishmuel points out that HaKadosh Baruch Hu calls the Eved Ivri. Why not Eved Yehudi, Eved Yisrael? So he says Ivri is Avram Ivri. Ivri means on the opposite side of the river, that the whole world is there, all the goyim are there, different. Eved Ivri means that even when you're an Eved, you're an Ivri. Even when you're an Eved, he's still Ben Lamakim. Eved Ivri. It's that perfect unification. That even when the Eved is an Eved, he's not an Eved Stam, a Jewish Eved. He's an Ivri. That he looked at the world the way Avram looked at the world, which is Ever Lamakim. Ever Lanar. Different. That's Eved Ivri. A unification of an Eved, that even when you're an Eved, a Jew is still an Ivri. And a Jew who has both those worlds together, of an Eved and an Ivri in a healthy way, will go free by Shemitah, will go free by Shabbos. At some point the Gula comes, because someone who's able to have those two worlds come together in a healthy way, it's a matter of time before the Gula happens. That's the process of the going from just an Eved in one world, and a Yisrael in another, Bon, to put it together as Avinu Malkeinu. And once a Jew has that healthy cohesiveness, that leads to Gula. And that's all of life, is just trying to sort of take these two worlds and put them together in a healthy way. Shall be Zeicha to have that, to be Avodim, the consistency of Avodim, but to have the passion of a Ben. And if you put them together, like I said, you'll go free in the Shemitah, which is Shabbos, Yom Shekula Shabbos, maybe.